A few weeks ago, I went onto Steam and bought a copy of Need for Speed Unbound for an extortionate $70. I had heard generally mixed reviews for the game, although I had also heard that it was all around much better than the 3 games that had come out before it in Need for Speed's current era, and that, with the recent updates, it was actually getting a lot better. You see, I grew up with the Need for Speeds many consider to be part of the golden era. For me, it was everything from Underground 1 through to Pro Street, so I usually go into a new Need for Speed expecting more of what I grew up with. The problem being, Need for Speed has never really had a consistent style, or at least not since they started changing up the gameplay in the late 90s. So any preconception of what a Need for Speed game should be going into this would be, in a practical sense, pointless. So let's look at it a different way. Going into the game, I can't think of it as another Pro Street or Underground or even a Carbon or Most Wanted, which are the two it calls back to most. Instead, I have to think of it more as its own separate entity outside of those games, but still based on those kind of ideas, almost like how people think of a spiritual successor in many games. So, thinking about it like it's its own game, what did I think of it? It's complicated. On one hand, there are certain things this game does arguably better than any other NFS from the last decade, if not ever, and on the other, there's some moments while playing that make me want to chuck my PC out the window. So let's get into it.
I'll let you have that, baby.
So, to begin, let's start with the gameplay. How does the game feel? It feels good. Like other certified gamers that have played older racing games, I'm certainly not a fan of Brake to Drift, but Unbound has one of the better implementations of it I've seen so far, and even has the ability to disable it if you want a more realistic driving experience. The game feels good to play. Is it the best physics in an arcade racer? No, far from it, but it definitely could have done a lot worse with it. Like many Need for Speeds since the failed sequel 2012, it does suffer from the problem of spontaneous, which is real fun, especially during the last quarter of a challenging race or a really intense pursuit, but outside of that, the game generally feels fine. When it comes to the race mechanics, we primarily have a change to the NOS system new to the NFS franchise, called Burst Nitrous, which is a short burst of speed which charges in 3 separate stages, and can basically be thought of kind of like a drift boost from Mario Kart, except this can be charged by drifting, drafting, jumping, hitting the apex of a turn while grip turning, and generally just driving as reckless and fast as possible. Its properties are kind of hard to get used to at first. It doesn't actually increase your speed by a massive amount, or give you a lot of acceleration when using it from a launch, but it does dramatically shift your inertia while using it in a drift, making it a solid tool when trying to avoid crashes, make quick turns, or take a position in races. When used most effectively, it's a great option to have in your back pocket. However, those moments are usually relatively few and far between. When it comes to the events themselves, you have a few main types, mainly drift races, drift events, and takeovers. Street races are what they say on the tin, just your standard street race, whether it be around industrial parks, on the flowing hilly roads, or through the streets of downtown. These are generally fun to play and a pretty good time all things considered. The main drawback being the notable reuse of tracks, which doesn't seem that bad taken at face value, but I'll get into why that becomes a bigger issue later. The drift events are just small 3-lap circuits where the only points you gain are through boosting, hitting checkpoints, and of course, drifting. But the real interesting stuff is found in the new takeover mode, which thankfully isn't much like the real street takeovers it takes its name from.
Nice throw!
This guy's shoes fell off. Holy shit.
And instead more resembles the Gymkhana events you might remember if you played Dirt 3. These are solid, but again, if you played Dirt 3, you kind of experienced a more fleshed out and better handling version of this a decade ago. All of these events can be a bit difficult if you're unprepared or just unlucky, but generally the races and especially the drift and takeover events are very easy to beat. Oh, did I mention the day-night system? Basically, the game is broken up into day and night sections over 4 weeks for a total of 48 cycles. The day is mostly spent trying to do the relatively few races available as well as delivery runs for Rydell. The payouts in these are time-based, and you're awarded by getting the car you delivered as an unlock in the dealership. These have an equivalent at night for the various street racers, but instead your payouts are based on how damaged the car is when you finish. The nights are really where most of the action happens. The vast majority of races take place at night, as well as most of the highest paying races. This is also when the police are most active, and they will show up usually during races or just after them. Also, any heat accumulated during the day is then transferred into the night, meaning it may be advantageous to be more cautious or maybe even just not participating in the day events in order to have enough headroom to participate in the night events without having to worry as much about the police. Although this is very difficult when the heat meter itself increases very quickly and can be filled in as few as 5 races, if not less. So the gameplay seems solid. It's not perfect and could definitely be improved, but nothing offensively bad. So what about the story? What about the story? So, the story in the game is that you are an orphan teenager who, along with your fellow foster friend, Jasmine, or Yaz for short, helps out your friend and effectively father figure Rydell at his car shop. I'm gonna be honest with you right now, Rydell is the best character in the game, purely because he's the only one with a unique personality. Literally everyone else is some variation of LA douchebag, and this is no better exemplified than with Tess, who later on during the game is a helper and a backer who gets you into the street racing scene. See, basically you go out one night to help Rydell with his deliveries, realize he isn't picking up the phone, then go to check his garage only to see all the other rides stolen and your car taken by Yaz. Then later down the line you meet the aforementioned Tess, who called for a drop-off that leads you to an underground meetup, where you find Yaz has become some sort of underground race promoter and organizer, and gained that status driving your car, that she absolutely ruined, might I add, and she announces The Grand, a large street racing event happening in 4 weeks, with qualifiers every Sunday. There's also the character of Alec, who apparently is the guy running the whole operation. We never see him, just hear about him in passing, so the most you get to beating him is after you win the Grand, you hear he apparently went broke. Would have been cool to at least see him once during this whole game, but maybe Criterion is holding off on that for now in hopes of expanding it in the next game. I don't know. When it comes to the whole your garage and car was taken kind of thing, it's definitely trying to call back to the old Most Wanted story of having your car taken and then you having to deal with a crap box, but the thing is, you were already driving a crap box. To be honest, the story is kinda mid. Like, it just doesn't have a whole lot going on while you're playing through the majority of the game, and the characters make it harder to enjoy when they have as much personality as a piece of cardboard with the word influencer scribbled on it, and the main antagonist isn't even present for his own downfall. Older NFS games had this down. You're introduced to the antagonist either at the beginning or near the end of the game, then you build up the ranks in order to gain money, experience, and notoriety, to then be able to challenge the final boss. I guess they threw that out the window and thought, old man and orphan trying to be cool and failing would be better. It's not like its ideas don't have potential, it's that they don't make the most of that potential. So, if the game itself seems decent enough on paper, how is the game's vibe? Which is really why most people buy a game like this. What, you thought people bought this game to race? No one's done that in years. To quote a big inspiration of mine, you could perfect a video game mechanically. You could get it working as good as possible, but unless it's also, fun to look at and cool, most people aren't going to give a shit. Speaking from experience. So how is it? When this game came out, many of you will likely remember the discussion around the new, quote, anime effects that made the game look like a race straight out of Initial D Stage 5, and how it had a very, let's say, lukewarm reception.
Need for Speed Unbound's effects, they're not for everyone. Well, no, that's a lie, because they said you could turn them off. not quite true.
This is not something that a lot of players really liked. Actually, the community seemed like it was split 50-50.
You know why Need for Speed Unbound's graffiti effects were controversial? Because it's the first racing game in years that doesn't look identical to everything else on the market.
I honestly don't have that much of a problem with it, mainly because it's a new aesthetic for the game that isn't either trying to steal from an old Fast and Furious or a new one. Would I personally have gone with this? No, but they could have done much worse with it, and it's generally a step in a more unique and promising direction if they did it right. When it comes to the cutscenes and the character designs, I really enjoyed the cel-shaded style. Really reminds me of Jet Set Radio, or really the last big racing game to do it, Auto Modelista. When it comes to the music, I'm actually going to approach this in a different way than I normally would. Frequent viewers of the channel will know that I normally talk about the music in a very opinionated way based on my music taste, but I think there's a better way to look at the Unbound soundtrack. Many people have already pointed out the OST's low points, mainly the most annoying pieces of bass-boosted noise.
Somebody say, hey, we want some money. Hey, we want some money.
But I generally can't get too disappointed about the quality of the soundtrack. What is disappointing though is the fact that the OST has extremely little variation. Like back in games like Underground 2, you would have rap, electronica, nu metal, southern rock, and others. That would make it feel extremely diverse, but also extremely of the time. While in Unbound, 90 to 95% of the soundtrack gives off the same vibe and same feel as everything else does, with the primary differentiating factor being that they're all in different languages, which I'm not opposed to, but like many of the characters in the game, what's the point of introducing new cultures and foreign ideas to an established style, but then making them all the same? You know, if I wanted to feel like I was in another country without actually getting to know the culture, I wouldn't use this game. I'd use this video's sponsor, ExpressVPN, the #1 reason why I can afford to fuel my LS-powered beast. For those somehow unaware, VPNs are great tools for protecting your information from anyone from your average network administrator to an entire government, keeping your browsing habits out of the hands of ISPs so they don't sell your data to ad agencies, and for browsing content that may be locked in your region. They do this by sending your data to an encrypted server before it gets sent to your ISP, preventing them from taking a look at all that. Maybe it's better if I don't look either. ExpressVPN is one of the top-rated VPNs for speed, reliability, and ease of use. So if you want to give them a try, go to my link in the description to get 49% off a 1-year plan, plus 3 extra months for free. That's ExpressVPN at my link in the description. For those that don't know, Need for Speed Unbound was made in collaboration with the rapper A$AP Rocky, and features him in a mission, as the announcer for the takeover events, and also with a few songs on the soundtrack. The thing is, I think they should have leaned way more into his sound and the sounds of his collaborators, particularly two, Nego and Tyler the Creator. Let's talk about Tyler first. This guy would have been perfect to put on the soundtrack of a Need for Speed game, not just because he does quality work, but because, at least for the past 10 years if not longer, much of his style has been tied to his cars. Whether you go back to his old stuff with tracks like Beamer,
You remind me on Beamer, a lot of trunk space, the perfect 2-seater.
or maybe a track about one of his McLarens off Flower Boy,
Crashed a McLaren, bought me a Tesla. I know you sick of me talking about cars, but what the fuck else do you want from me? That is the only thing keeping me company.
or something even more recent.
Rolls Royce pull up, black boy hop out. Shout out to my mother and my father didn't pull out. MSG sell out, fuck these niggas yap out.
Tyler seems to not only be a good fit musically, but he's never shy to show his love for good cars, including his Fiat 131, BMW E30 M3, 2 different Lancia Delta Integrales, and a McLaren 675 LT. He even went and named one of his freestyles Group B when he released it as a single. I think if they were going to add anyone, Tyler would have been a perfect fit. For Nego, while I don't know his work as well, what I can say is that his style more closely resembles the other styles of the game, but with more energy and variability between each track.
You said you needed 5, that was more than 12 ago. Claim you got your hands tied, time stuck like Velcro. Georgia.
He was also the DJ for the Japanese rap group Teriyaki Boys, which, if you don't know, means that along with Pharrell Williams and Chad Hugo, is partially responsible for this. That has turned him some street cred from the modern car enthusiast. When it comes to the music, they had so much more they could have done, but instead they decided to make a game about standing out have a homogeneous soundtrack. There is one thing though that I just have to question. When did Need for Speed get edgy? And I don't mean actually edgy, nothing with an EA sticker would touch anything even slightly controversial with a 10-foot pole if they could help it. I basically mean to say, when did Need for Speed feel the need to start swearing? Like even this, the track you're listening to right now, which is the main menu theme, i.e. the first thing you hear when you boot up the game, is called Shittin' Me, and is almost completely uncensored in-game. Like, why? I by no means have a problem with the game having swearing in it, especially not from a series that has had T-rated games for close to 2 decades now, but like, why in a Need for Speed? It doesn't make the characters seem any cooler or grittier, it just seems kind of forced and lazy, like they didn't have a better way to write the characters. So they just made them sound like if you took a random character from an average modern adult animated show, made them an LA douchebag and made them less interesting. Older games in the series had this down, because even if those games didn't necessarily have the writing talent of Citizen Kane, they did make the characters engaging enough to want to listen to them for more than 5 seconds at a time without them becoming annoying. Well, if the characters aren't any good, then what about the cars and customization? They actually did a pretty good job with this. The game features a car list that, while not huge for a modern racing game, is still very impressive for a Need for Speed title, which usually has fewer cars than its contemporaries. And the game provides a wide variety of body mods like bumpers, spoilers, diffusers, hood scoops, and even fender flares, all of which can be added to most cars. Then you can slap whatever recycled liveries or neon-colored dreck you want to make your car unique. But honestly, that's just fine. At this point, I was actually kinda enjoying my time playing the game, and then I got past the 5-hour mark and I started to notice some major problems I had with the game. First and foremost, the game gets very repetitive very quickly, as the gameplay loop of do day races, heat goes up, maybe do a delivery, go to garage, maybe upgrade or buy a new car, go to night, do night races, do 30 minutes of cop chases, go to garage, repeat, wears thin after you get about a week and a half and you realize you have 30 more hours of this before you get to the end. And I need to highlight the worst part of this, the cop chases. You know how in older NFS titles like Most Wanted and Carbon, your heat would slowly increase over a number of events and interactions, meaning that the cops would get more aggressive and have better equipment, but you'd also have a faster car to compensate for that? Well, they threw that right out the window, and made it so now you can reach max heat in about 3 or 4 races, and you would be held at max heat until the next day starts, meaning you could enter a max heat pursuit with Corvettes, armored Camaros, helicopters, and massive armored Ford Raptors in a car barely fast enough to hit 140 miles an hour. And that already sounds bad, but it gets worse, as even though you're being faced with the most the PD can throw at you, it's still not that difficult. I escaped plenty of pursuits driving a B tier car, which is the lowest in the game's ranking system. That tells me that if I enter a pursuit in a much faster car, say an A+ or an S tier, the pursuits would be piss easy. And the pursuits themselves aren't engaging. From what I've found, the cops have like one of 2 modes. So scared of you that they hover around going the same speed as you, just with a half a car length buffer so you can't hit them or even engage with them at all. Or so aggressive you think they'd jump off a cliff just to slow you down. I guess that's one thing it shares in common with Most Wanted. But I thought we would improve something like this over 18 years. Instead, we have boring cop chases that last forever and can happen at any moment, because the cops absolutely swarm the city. The people in the game talk about the local government like it's a police state, and I think I'm starting to believe them, because they must have 10,000 people working for the PD to have this many people out on a Tuesday night. Like, look at this clip. This was from a recording I did of some night racing, and look at this. This is what happened when I was in 2 police chases back to back, and it lasted me nearly 30 minutes. That's over 4 times longer than the entire final pursuit from Most Wanted. And that was whenever I was only about 6 hours into the game. This was by far the worst part of my experience playing the game, because instead of speeding down the street the whole time and engaging in cop chases when necessary, I basically spent most of my time between events effectively sneaking around cops and helis trying to avoid detection. What part of this game, with its neon lighting, bombastic effects, and bass-boosted soundtrack, screams stealth and subtlety to you? The last major issue I encountered was the game's polish. In the first 10 hours of playing the game, I experienced a total of 6 crashes, usually when entering a race or a cop chase. And it's not like I'm attempting to run the game on a potato PC, I'm running with a 5700X and a 6700 XT, which, for those that don't know, should be more than enough to run this game, so I don't know why it's having this many issues. Even a couple weeks ago, I upgraded to a 3080 Ti, a much better graphics card, and then I went and streamed Unbound after updating my drivers. 2 crashes in an hour and a half. This also extends to the multiplayer experience because, as of writing this script, I haven't even got to try it, because this was what my first online experience was like. So I can't honestly say I give it a positive review from my experience, but from what I've researched about it, it isn't without its own issues, namely that the private party system is limited to only 4 players max. What racing game that actually bothers to have a private party system limits the party's max size to 4? You let people play with up to 16 in a lobby, so let them invite 16 or 15 to a party. How did they miss that? So, would I recommend Unbound to someone looking to try a new Need for Speed? Well, if you're going into the game for its in-depth customization, its incredible graphics and lighting, its fun drifting mechanics, or its new and unique visual flares, then I think you'll have a fun time with this game. $70 worth of fun? No. More like 40, at best. And if, like me, you go into these games more to experience the races, listen to the story, get in a cop chase or two, and feel the vibe of the game's atmosphere, I wouldn't pick this up for anything more than $25, maybe 30. Or you could just pick up an older title like Heat or even FH3 if you're on Xbox and don't mind finding a physical copy. Or just go back to the classics of the series. Speaking of which, I think that's what I'm going to do right now. So I guess this wasn't really what I was looking for. Time to wait till 2025. I guess I'll check back with y'all then. If you want to talk more shop about racing games or anything else really, stop by the Discord. There'll be a link to that in the description too. And check out my Twitch channel. I've been streaming Unbound and other racing games and things too. So stop by if you want to hang out for a bit.